K6 office hours. I am Nicole van der Hoeven, and we are doing something a little bit different this time. This is pre-recorded, so I will be in the comments live, but one of our guests today couldn't make it at the normal time, and we still wanted to have him on. So today I am not joined by my usual co-host Simme Aronson. Instead, I brought in Mihail, whom we've seen before.
Hi,
Who are
I'm
you,
Mihail.
Mihail?
I'm one of the K6 open source developers. I have been with K6 for like 3 years, and I'm glad to be back on the office hours.
Yeah, second time. Last time we had Ivan Skiba talking about how to make plugins, how to make extensions for K6. And our special guest today is Grant.
I
Could you introduce yourself?
don't know how special I am, but yeah, sure. My name is Grant Young. I'm a staff software engineer at Test at GitLab, the DevOps platform.
Okay. So what do you do as a software engineer in test?
So my particular role in GitLab is to help with the quality testing of performance, as well as actually testing GitLab at scale. So we need to actually a lot of that work involves how to actually set up GitLab at scale, because it's like most software is comprised of various components. So we need to actually define how that actually looks at different scales, and then we actually test that with performance and various other things. So that's my main day to day.
So what do you think is the difference between a performance tester and a software engineer in test focusing on performance?
In quality roles are quite flexible. Usually you'll get people kind of dabbling into different spaces, because usually companies will need their quality teams to kind of go into those spaces. Performance in the past always has been more of a side gig. Talking several years ago, of course, not recently, and it's become obviously more and more of an important aspect where now there's more dedicated roles out there. My role is to manage the performance testing with GitLab, although it's not my title, but that is kind of the main part of my role, and then everything else that comes off that, like say actually figuring out the right environments, the right test data, all that stuff. So yeah, people just keep usually most companies, there's not much dedicated resource, but hopefully that continues to change, because performance testing is it's its own discipline really. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It seems like, because I come from the testing side, and I definitely feel like the lines are blurring significantly between performance tester, even site reliability engineer. There's a bit of blurring there. And we're kind of existing in the intersection of several fields, but there's nothing like a testing engineer in dev. Unfortunately.
I mean, I think we might be heading towards that in some spaces for sure. I mean, the quality space in particular in software has changed dramatically since I started around 10 years ago, whereas back in the old days it was click some buttons and report manually that those buttons either work or don't work, and then it's just completely kind of expanded massively since then, and into all these different disciplines, and in the case like performance testing or another one is security testing, they require quite a lot of knowledge and discipline in that space, and then that does kind of start to blur lines further about a person who could test performance well could probably also develop in that regard as well, and yeah, the lines are continuously blurring. Quality is always an evolving space, so I wouldn't, who knows where it's going to go next really, but yeah, I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised if it went in that direction.
yeah. So just to take a step back here, could you give us like a brief the spiel on GitLab? What is it? What do you do?
Yeah, how to describe GitLab succinctly? We call it a DevOps platform, but at its heart, it's a source code management tool. But we've also all these other tools that we want to give developers in one place for them to be able to do the full development of software from start to finish. So source control, CI, and various other tooling in one place, in one product, so they can go from start right to the end without having to use multi-tool chains and all the complexities that comes in with that.
Hmm. So the reason that we wanted to have you on office hours is because we heard that you at GitLab started to do load testing, started including load testing as part of GitLab with K6. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, I kind of got burned out of the fact that when I was brought in, we need to start really ramping up the performance testing of GitLab itself, and this is where the fun part of being GitLab is. A lot of the stuff that we do for GitLab also could be a feature in GitLab for every user to use with GitLab against their own software, which is a mind melter of a statement, but that's the space we live in. It's kind of a circular space. So we needed to ramp up performance test efforts against GitLab itself, so we could start improving the performance of the products. And we did a selection of what tools we want to use out there to try and help us in this journey. And K6 immediately kind of popped up and really showed off to be a really decent performant tool that ticked a lot of boxes for us. We took that, we added a small wrapper just for some specific GitLab stuff that we needed and some additional features. And we started really performance testing GitLab, and that went really well. And then the question kind of came up of, can we now add this in for users to use in GitLab against their own software? So it wasn't a direct copy and paste. It was a similar idea. So we looked at adding in a CI feature where people can write up a K6 test in their CI and run it, and then GitLab will report some key metrics from that test in the UI for easy kind of consumption.
So not to make Mihail's head too big, but why did you end up choosing K6?
The performance tool kind of space right now, there's there's quite a few tools out there, but some of them are quite old or have lost maintenance or are not being actively developed anymore. Some of them are quite specific in what they want to do, and that's okay. They're just to like hit one endpoint and that's it. The thing that attracts us to K6 is that it's performant, it's based on Go, and its scripting language is JavaScript, which means that you have a lot more flexibility in writing tests and actually having a full language there to actually work with is quite important. Is quite a big feature compared to, say, working with like a YAML file or something else along those lines. So K6 really did kind of pop up, and the fact that it was like actively being developed and is becoming quite a leading tool in the space, that just helped.
Mihail, I know that you were also not too long ago doing some pretty extensive tests on the performance of K6, wasn't it?
I think that I'm doing pretty well. Mostly they're not extensive. I'm constantly testing K6 on its performance. In not more regards, because like we sometimes have had regressions which have been like mostly very easy to fix, but like they do happen. And K6 is in generally very performant. I would definitely not say that there are not corner cases where we have like extremely bad performance, which is mostly due to like mostly bad API of the current system, but that's probably going to change. Like we have fixed a lot of those, and I'm pretty sure we're going to fix all the current ones. But yeah, I would in general say that K6 is performant, and we're trying to like make it as performant as possible, because obviously it's very strange if the tool that you're using to performance test is slow or can't do its job.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of a lot of what makes it performant is owed to Go, to the fact that it's built in Go?
I would definitely say that like I don't think that we would have been able to get this performance and this speed of development in practically any other language. Go is definitely one of the reasons that K6 is as performant as it is currently.
I also think that it's the only performance or load testing tool that I know of that is written in Go, unless either of you has heard of anything else.
There are a couple that are mostly like what was the Apache tool? Like Apache has like a very basic tool that basically hits one endpoint. Like there are a couple of Go clones of that that'll have like maybe they can hit like a list of tools, but with a list of links, but they're literally like you give them these 6 links and they get them. So I generally don't consider those tools like tools for performance testing. I guess they're testing performance, but like I don't really consider them to be like even in like
Yeah.
competition with K6. I guess there is like some user base that's actually like okay with them, and like K6 is a thing that they can use. And I would argue that in practically all cases, the other tools are going to be much more performant because they basically don't have to do anything else but like do requests. So yeah.
I think that's kind of what Grant was saying earlier, that there are a lot of tools that just make the requests, but I think that load testing or performance testing is way more than just being able to mechanically make the request. It's also creating a load profile around that. It's also think time and workload modeling and all the things that are a framework. Like K6 is more than just a request sender, right? It's also a way to verify that the response that you're getting is the correct one. It's a way to schedule requests throughout an entire testing cycle. Like there's a lot more involved than just sending a request.
Yeah, and I also don't know like of any of those who that can like do put 5 items in a cart and then buy all the 5 items, for example. Like they just don't have any scripting. So yeah. So
Yeah.
those tools are definitely more performant than K6, and I know of like a couple that are written in Go, but like I don't remember at least off the top of my head any like scriptable such one. So yeah.
Yeah. So Grant, you're saying that it sounded like you used K6 initially just internally without any expectation of using it further. So you were mainly just using it to test GitLab itself, and then later on you decided to add it into your offerings. Why did you decide to do that?
The tool we built with to test GitLab itself, we call the aptly named GitLab Performance Tool. That tool kind of just grew got a little bit popular internally, and other people would start using it as well for their testing because
That's
you've got a
awesome.
tool, and then also kind of started to get a little bit popular with some customers as well. So that kind of grew out of organically in that way. And then the question was asked, like, it would be good to have this in GitLab itself. This question we ask often at GitLab. So it was just kind of internal discussion about, oh, this could be good in a different way to make it work within GitLab itself. So that's kind of how that happened, really. Yeah.
I think that's one of the benefits of eating your own dog food and using the thing that you're building, right? Because you are also a user of GitLab. And so
Yeah.
when something makes your life easier when you are using it, then there's a good chance that it'll make other users' lives easier too.
Yeah, we love to dog food at GitLab. It's difficult at times, obviously, and not everything applies. Like the cases we use to test GitLab, as I say, we built a wrapper we don't have in the GitLab feature itself, because that wrapper only really applies for GitLab testing. But the core of it, the K6 core, was something very viable to move in, so that's what we did.
So what is the difference between K6 and this wrapper? Like what are you adding in the wrapper?
And the main thing we added that, because K6 is a good tool to run in like separate tests, if you write out different test files. The wrapper we added was simply just to kind of run multiple tests in sequentially, so we can have like 50 tests running, and then the wrapper will collect all those tests, individual test results, and present them in a nice way at the end. So it does little things like that. It also does a whole bunch of specific GitLab stuff, like it checks the GitLab server and its version and detects, oh, I can't actually run that test, it's not valid for this version, and stuff like that. But yeah, nothing crazy.
Okay. Would you be able to show us how it looks?
I could do. Don't have that one to hand, so bear with me. I'll get something to hand, and I can show you that in a second.
Yeah, no worries. No pressure. I mean,
No, it's fine. I'll
live
have.
demos are difficult. But I'm just personally curious. I've used GitLab before, but it was some time ago, and I've definitely never used the load testing part. When did that actually come out?
The load performance test feature where you can run it in GitLab was added sometime last year. I don't have the specific time off the top of my head, but yeah,
Hmm.
maybe towards the end of last year. But I'll double check now. Maybe 13.2, so it's probably about June, July last year.
Okay, cool.
So I can show you how our test tool, which tests a GitLab environment, works. If you give me a second.
Sure, no problem. Mihail, I think you talked to Grant last year. Was it last year that you talked to him? Or was it earlier this year?
No, we talked earlier this year. I think that we have had a lot of back and forth in like the issues, and maybe the community forum or maybe Slack, but that was like last year. But yeah, we talked maybe a month ago about exactly the internal tool that they're using and what they actually try to do, and so on and so forth. And like we do plan on having some kinds of K6 runs multiple tests and then the reports something nicer, but like it's summer and the list. I don't even know like how like what it's going to look like, and yeah. So
Grant, are you ready for me to
add
the? Okay, here you go. All right.
All right, thanks very much.
Could you just zoom in just a little bit?
Yeah.
Just in case people are watching with normal monitors or laptop screens.
Sure. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
So this is like a full run where we set up an environment in GitLab, which is about a 10,000 user size environment. We run various tests against various endpoints and web endpoints with various K6 tests, but our wrapper just takes them all and runs them all sequentially, collects the results. This is like the full output, which you guys will be familiar with. This is pure K6 output at this point. And the big, like say that at the end, it comes in with because of the ratio, the table's been wrapped, but there's just a table here at the end where you just see the specifics about how every test did, and there's some specific metrics around like what RPS was achieved, the time to first byte, average time to first byte, 90th percentile, how many requests were successful, and the result. And that's really the key thing of our wrapper. It just makes it all packaged up. So because we need to come in every day and look at this every day, so we need to parse it up and make it consumable at a glance. So.
Oh, that's great. And did you do this by using the handle summary function that we released? Was it 0.29?
No, because this predates that, so we had to come up with our way to do it. We do want to go back and look at the newer K6 features and switch over to them, because there's no point doing it ourselves if K6 does it, but we've just not had the chance yet. So we know that's there, and that's a really useful feature. I think I did ask about it early on about changing the summary output and stuff, but yeah, you could see that got in.
Mihail, is that the way that you would suggest if someone were to do this now, if they were doing this now, would you say handle summary would be the way to go?
I mean, like it's probably going to make it a lot better. I don't know, like I don't remember whether or not you're currently using like an output and then aggregating all the things from an output, or are you doing that, or are you using like thresholds and basically parsing the current summary, like the text one that's up here?
We parse the current summary. Yeah, that's how we currently do it.
Yeah, I guess in that case you even use like just the JSON summary, which has more or less all the stuff that the handle summary gets, just like as a JSON, then just work with the
use
JSON.
it. We do use that in places as well. Yeah, we use like the text output and the JSON output in various ways. Yeah, to do the collated output. Once K6 gets the full ability to run mobile tests and has a summary of how those tests run, our wrapper would become pretty redundant. Although we'll probably still need something to select what tests to run and stuff like that because we need to pull the GitLab environment for various things. But in terms of the actual wrapper features, that would be the next big step that people would be able to do like this.
Yeah, I remember that we actually added the original JSON summary in part because you probably asked for
Yeah,
it.
I did ask about
Also.
it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because there wasn't a summary output for
yeah,
K6 at the time. There was a JSON output, but that was like a
Mhm.
very raw debug-like output that was very hard to parse. But then you guys did the JSON output, which we do output this tool is output, and we do definitely read it for some stuff. So yeah, thanks for that.
You're welcome, I guess.
So how would if a user of GitLab wanted to add a K6 load test to fire off after a commit or a release or something like that, do they then also provide the K6 script, or do you just kind of use a default one?
And they should provide the cases script by design because everyone will have a
Okay.
different.
Yeah.
I think we do default to like a very basic script, just
Okay.
because we need something to run if you set up the job. So it's like it's
Yeah.
one of the example scripts that K6 themselves provide that you provide. That is, it literally just hits like a HTTP server a few times and that's it. But yeah, we encourage people to dive in and write their own load tests because every application is different. So.
Okay. And do you find that for CI/CD pipelines that these load tests are like peak load tests with, many users, or is it mainly a couple of users just to verify the performance on a lower level?
It's completely up to the end user. That's why we designed it. If they want to do a big load test, that's huge, then they can write the test to do that and change the settings to make that work. Or if they most likely for this feature, because it would usually be used with an MR or pull request in GitHub terms. Usually that's specific to a feature area or something more focused. So usually a load test in that vein would be something specific for that feature. So again, it completely depends on how they want to test, whether it's number of users or they just want to hit an endpoint of a bunch of RPS. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk us through this the instructions for how to get it going?
Sure. Yeah. So it's an extension of GitLab CI. So we have to assume that there's some for people who want to do this. We probably need to read up on GitLab CI first and how to set up that, and how we've got a whole bunch of specialized jobs that you can call in CI that would then report in the GitLab UI in various ways. We already had a feature kind of like this with browser performance testing, which is the other side of life where we actually test the web page itself to see how it performs in a browser. That was already in GitLab for several
Hmm.
years. So, and then we just that's kind of where this conversation came from. We thought we could extend this to
Hmm.
the backend load testing essentially to see how the server performs at that. Um, the configuration, as you can see here, I mean, I'm not going to read out the page, of course, because that'd be quite boring. But the configuration here, you just see this is the YAML file for GitLab CI. You'll see things about include this template, which is something that we provided. This is what a special job is. We already have the full template already built into GitLab. You just need to pass in your file, as well as any options you want to have as a variable. And
Mhm.
then when you depending on how you set up the job, if it's like runs every MR or if it's a manual task you click on a button to run or something else like that, every time it's configured to run, it runs, and then GitLab should take the output of the test and show various key aspects in the merge request UI, which I can show you now here. So this is a GitLab merge request, and this is for both features I described. So one is with the browser side and one's with the load side. It runs two jobs in the background, and it's then going off and collected their artifacts and then parses them to show them in these widgets here. So about here you'll see this low performance test actually shows several metrics that are relevant. So the time to first byte, P90, P95, the RPS, how many requests were successful. It also compares it to the last run. If it's the same branch, it is able to go back and check, and that's what this text up here is about. It's 3 degraded and 1 same, which means that the last
Mm.
one has actually got worse. in this case. But that's fine. That's good to know.
Is that based on the response time? On the
The feed degraded,
RPS? Or
the feed
okay.
degraded is literally taking each value and comparing it to the previous run.
Oh, okay, all three of them,
Yeah.
including the checks.
So that's the one that'll be the same here, the checks, which
Mm.
is good. It shows you how 100% were successful. So that's what you want to see.
That's really cool. That's actually a feature I would love to see in K6, the ability, or probably K6 Cloud, the ability to compare between runs and say, you know, how much worse it was. On K6 Cloud, you can manually compare two runs, but it would be kind of nice to be able to compare to a baseline, even just in K6 OSS, but that's probably more difficult.
Yeah, that was already built into GitLab, so we were to piggyback on that,
Yeah.
thankfully. So it is able to take different jobs in the same branch and look at the previous and see what's going on.
I think that one of the original like things that you could do with like a handout summary is exactly this in like K6, but you basically would need to like do it on your own. So like you can like in the handout summary get the previous results somehow. Like obviously like in the case of GitLab, you have some logistics on how to like get the previous run, whatever that means, and then like compare it to it. In the case of K6, like we don't know this. So like until we decide on
Yeah.
some, or if we at all like decide to like integrate it very tightly, we will need to like have some logistics on how to get the previous run, and then what comparisons we should do and like what they mean basically.
Mm. And slightly off topic here. What do you use for the browser performance test?
It's site speed.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I coughed when you said it, so I didn't hear
Sorry,
it.
we use site speed for that
Site
site.
speed. Okay, all right, cool. And is that also that's not, there's no script for that, right?
Site speed is a big bunch of different tooling that they kind of piece together to handle the obviously browser testing is no that's quite complicated. You need to run a browser and have all these different things to measure the different metrics and all that. So site speed is best run, in our experience, is run best as a Docker. I also need to run each component manually, which is quite a heavy burden. So in a Docker, though, everything just runs in Docker, obviously, and you point out a page and it just fires out a whole bunch of different stats and statistics. So yeah.
I really like this because I love that it's both sides, the front end and the back end. And one of the reasons that you should do both ideally is just this, it's being shown right here that like if you just looked at the browser side, the front end side, you'd see, oh, 13 improved, 1 degraded. So it got better. But if you look at the back end side, oh, it's 3 degraded. So it tells a slightly different story because they're measuring different things. And you kind of have to have both because neither of them shows the complete picture.
This is why performance testing and the space is a discipline, because they're they're two sides of the same coin, you could say, but they are completely different disciplines in themselves. A server failure performance-wise is completely different to a browser failure performance-wise. In fact, the browser usually is actually a bit more complicated. Typically, browsers are usually quite simple. Servers usually is quite simple comparatively in context, because servers just like, okay, there's a bottleneck somewhere in our server code.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's much more of a straight line of finding out what thing is with browsers. It's all about CSS and divs and all these other JavaScript and paints, and there's a lot of layers to a modern browser, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Now this is really good because once tests are tied to, you know, the development cycle, then these tests are just firing off without manual intervention. I mean, that's the whole point. But I think it's really cool that performance tests are, and that I'm starting to see performance tests in CI/CD pipelines too, because it seems like it wasn't too long ago when that wasn't the case.
No, and I think it's probably still early days for that, and that's the reason is that the performance testing itself is actually somewhat the easier part of the whole problem. When you're wanting to do for browser testing, it's a little bit easier because browser's all it's encapsulated, it's easy, it's in a bubble. But for server testing, you need to actually have a server to test against. So you need to make sure it's kind of like a scientific experiment. You need to make sure it's exactly the same server each time. so the results are comparable. And you need to then figure out what size server do we need, what kind of makeup of server do we need, should it be able to even handle this throughput that we want to target? Can it handle it? And then you also then need test data as well. So in my experience, actually, the actual setting of the tests themselves are actually a fraction of the effort.
Yeah.
But we're getting there.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Was there something else that you wanted to show us, or should I remove your screen?
No, that's it. Yeah, feel free to switch back.
Just to see you both better.
No problem.
No, I think that there's a lot to be said for adding performance, and you know how it's normally broken. Testing is normally broken up into two things: one's functional and one's non-functional. But I don't really like that distinction, because really they're both functional, right? They both affect how a user will be able to use your site. I mean, if your site's down, technically it's supposedly not within the realm of functional testing, but I argue that it really should be.
Yeah, those terms are quite they're long-standing terms, and in the old days maybe they were a bit more appropriate, but yeah, these days I find myself using them less, because non-functional is too hard of a line to define the tests, as you say. And performance, yeah, I agree. I say they really do cross into the realm of functional pieces. There's a difference between something that's a bit slow but still workable. It's like, okay, well, it's loading a bit slower, but it loads and I can use it, to something that doesn't load at all. That very much crosses into the realm of, well, it's literally not functional. It literally can't work. Yeah, I'd say those terms probably need to be archived, shall we say? But they still linger a lot, because unfortunately they do encapsulate a lot. When you say non-functional, like, okay, that means not specifically click the button, does it work kind of testing is the other stuff. But yeah, we need more terms essentially to show what each one means, really.
The reason that I brought it up is I think that breaking it up into functional and non-functional also gives the impression that you don't really need non-functional. It's almost like in people's heads it can also mean mandatory and optional, which is not at all the case, or at least it shouldn't be.
It does unfortunately fall into that pattern, yeah, more often than not. That's been the case with performance testing in the past as well. It usually has been relegated to a secondary test or function, or done after the fact, after the main functional testing is done. And yeah, these days that doesn't really much fly anymore. Users are rightfully wanting a performant application, and it should be treated as top tier.
I think it's kind of two sides of it, right? One, there are a lot of testers or development teams that still don't have performance tests built into their pipelines, even if they have functional tests. But also on the other end, there are a lot of performance testing tools that aren't nice to use within a CI/CD pipeline. Mihail, I think I know that with K6, that's one of the things that we want to achieve. We want it to be developer friendly, right?
Yeah, I think that was one of the primary goals, and the things that it was started with, the idea that we want people to run their performance tests practically all the time, preferably on, if not on each commit, then every day at least once, and that requires basically very good automation, because otherwise someone will have to run it manually, which is definitely not going to work. So yeah, integration with CI/CD is very common thing that we talk about and work on, and there are probably more blog posts about how to integrate with different CI/CD solutions and K6 than actual how to write K6 scripts, probably at this point. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, because I think I think a lot of the value of the activity of performance testing, or the study of performance testing, is setting up a framework so that it's repeatable. because the traditional method of going in and fixing an issue and then running a test, and then fixing more issues and then leaving, that's not really sustainable. I think it's much more, if you want to add value, you need to make it so that it's just part of the process. It's not just one activity that happens at the end.
Yeah, and that's basically the reason why we try to be very easy to integrate and like to be helpful, like returning actual errors when like errors happen. So like your pipeline will stop and like tell you why it stopped, hopefully. So you can do something reasonable about it, not just like, well, we did not manage to start your test. That probably doesn't mean that like you should like think that your application doesn't work. You probably should like try again instead of that.
And so I think GitLab is pretty cluey on that, because you were already using it internally before you rolled it out to GitLab users. Have you noticed any gotchas for setting it up?
The main challenge is it is easily integrable now with CI, which is the good thing. But the main challenge is then actually setting up the environment and having it work in a consistent way at scale for every MR or every commit. That scale for a large team can be quite heavy. So it's the challenge is for each team to have to, or each company to try and figure out what is an acceptable level for performance testing. We decided on daily. We test each major nightly build at GitLab daily, because we already have that kind of daily cadence, and so that works well for us, because we run it overnight. We come in the morning, check the results, make sure everything's all fine, and then that keeps us on track and make sure. And we have obviously caught some performance slips in the past, thanks to that. So the challenge, performance testing, this still, even though the tooling is improving and the guidance and the knowledge about it is improving, there's still quite a few different ways for different companies to set up. So the challenge is just trying to figure out what works best for you.
Yeah. I think you also mentioned earlier that consistency is key. I like what you said about how it's like a scientific experiment. You know, in a scientific experiment, you have a control group. You don't just start with, like, let's say it's an experiment for the effectiveness of a drug. You're not just going to get a bunch of people and administer the drug and that's it. That doesn't show you much, because you don't know how they would have been affected without the drug, or how their conditions would have changed without it. So I kind of think like the control group in scientific experiments is like a baseline in our world, right? You need some sort of baseline. So if you're not running regularly and you don't know how it was before you applied changes, then you're not really sure what changed or what you can do to change it back or to improve it.
Yeah, an individual performance test doesn't actually tell you that much in isolation. I can tell you, obviously, that endpoint is performing bad now in this case, but it might be performing better tomorrow. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that could be the case. So that's why I call it a scientific experiment, because you need to control the entire test setup from start to finish. You need to have the same environment, essentially. It needs to be clean. It can't be used by anyone else at the time, because someone else could be doing something that could be slowing down the server for some unknown reason. And you need to control the test data to make sure it's exactly the same each time. And so you need to basically it's a bit of an intensive process about removing every potential factor that could impact its performance test results. And once you've removed as much as you can, then that's probably where you want to be, and that's where we are right now. But yeah, it is the harder part of performance testing for sure, to have that set up and have a consistent way. Once you get there, it's good, but it's hard to then be a little bit more flexible and say, oh, well, but can we test this other environment? It's like, well, we can't test this because it's not controlled, and the results will be off, and yeah, so it's a challenge, but thankfully one that can be worked on and solved. Just needs to take some time and effort to do it.
Yeah. When you talk about making sure that you're testing the same environment, I remember times when people would run a test in like a pre-prod environment, like staging or or one specifically for performance testing, and then compare that with results in production. And it's like there might be some value to it, but you have to know you're not comparing apples to apples here. They are, depending on how it's set up, depending on things like the test data like you mentioned, or just the size and the power of the servers that are underlying those environments, it could be that you can't even compare them at all. That's
Yeah.
a hard pill to swallow for small teams that might not even have a pre-prod environment.
Yeah, it's a journey, performance testing, and people typically will go into those kind of common areas where they think, oh, we can just compare these two. Oh, look, this is good, this is bad. But then it's a journey where you have to take people along the reasons why actually that's not. It looks the same, it quacks the same, but it's actually two different ducks, I guess, for a bad analogy. It is apples and oranges, really. And even though it's the same software, the server make up the test data, what's actually happening on those environments at that particular time, all of that and more can affect a performance test to make it actually even substantially different. And that obviously that's bad data, and bad data can lead a whole teams astray, and then bad paths trying to figure out, oh, there's a bottleneck in the database when actually there's none. There's actually a different problem. So it is important to get that right, and it can be challenging. It's definitely the biggest challenge of performance testing, but once you get through that and actually have that consistent performance test, the data again is then golden and can help substantially. And we've made multiple performance fixes in GitLab over the last couple of years. I can't even count them all, really, where we've actually found good bottlenecks, good problems that we fixed. We're still on that journey, but yeah, hopefully our users and customers are seeing performance improvements.
That's the thing. It's like a race to the bottom, right? Like, I don't know of any company who's ever like, we're done with performance testing. It is as performant as it's ever going to get. That's a cue to run, I think.
I guess you could say that maybe for specific areas and stuff, we do have targets, and say once we get to the target, then that if that endpoint is performing to that target, then that's good. But yeah, the actual overall performance journey, yeah, you're on it for forever, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Go on.
I was going to add a little bit, like, one of the things that I noticed over like the last 3 years that I have worked in K6, because previous to that I did not have any. I guess I had performance load testing because I have done it for other things that I have built, but like not to the degree that I currently work with. Like a lot of the questions that we get and a lot of the problems that we see our clients have, at least the ones that I have like seen personally, they basically go in like one of the two directions. For like they either don't know what exactly they should test, and then they don't know what exactly like if they get the number 10, what does 10 mean? Like, is 10 good, is 10 bad, and so on and so forth, which is like in general the problem that we're like, well, we can't really tell you how you should like treat your data. Like, if this endpoint will be called like by 1,000 people, and like it needs to answer very fast because it blocks the, for example, the loading of your web page. It probably should be fast. Like that's the idea. But like if it's something that like someone will call and like he can wait like 10 seconds in order to get the result because it does some very complicated calculation, it's probably okay for it to be like 10 seconds. It's not a problem, and so on and so forth. Like all those things are different, and also like the fact that the one endpoint can handle like 1,000 and the other can handle like 2 calls a second. It's also like it's all depends on what you do. And there are things like people are generally like, we want to run our like our production is Amazon Web Services, and we have like endpoints across the world, and like we want to do that, but like not actually have things across the world, and not actually test them across the world, and like have the same results as if we like just have one server. And like in a lot of cases, that's not really like again possible, because the thing is that like maybe if your architecture is correct, it will scale exactly the same. But in other cases, it won't, because like something will be centralized somewhere, and like your code in Japan, for example, would be really, really slow compared to your other codes, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I still get asked that a lot. Like, what response time should we be looking for? And you can't really answer that. There's no one answer for everyone. There are a few things that you can do to try and figure out that number. You can look at studies like the one that Google did, saying that after 3 seconds, people dramatically drop off. You can look at competitors' site and measure their performance with one user. Don't run load tests on other people's sites. But the reality is, if you have a direct competitor and your site is really slow, people are probably going to that competitor's site. So maybe see how they're doing. Another thing you could do is look at HTTP archive, which is an archive of a lot of things, but also response times of different web pages. You could look at ones that are in your industry in particular, because people have different expectations. Like if you're applying for a mortgage, you don't necessarily need an answer in 1 second, right? And in fact, that might even be a warning flag if you get a decision in less than 1 second for something of that magnitude. But maybe if it's just an e-commerce site, maybe people want to be able to buy quickly, and in that case 1 second might be reasonable. It's hard to tell. But I also like that, like what Grant, what you were saying, Grant, was in the GitLab results, you're not just looking at the response times and saying, oh, that passed or that failed, because it's impossible to know. It depends on people's situations. What you're looking at is comparative response time, which is, I think, a lot healthier, because that's more useful for everybody.
Yeah, it can be difficult. If I should say that the research on how quick a server endpoint can respond is limited. There is some classic studies from the past where if you're over a second, you're probably starting to get into a bit of a not so great territory, because that people will start to respond negatively if it takes more than a second. Obviously, the worse it gets, the worse the response. And since then, there's been various kind of targets thrown out there by different companies like Google and everyone else. We've selected a target for 200 milliseconds for server endpoint response time, and that doesn't mean you will get your visible response in front of you by then, but that's just kind of taking that part of the process and trying to keep that as lean as possible. Because then there's the browser response time, which then it goes through it takes the data and has to render it on the browser, and that completely depends on the machine it's running on. And so there's a whole chain for a request to actually fully complete. But we do have criteria along the way, but then we also have we do have the comparative as well to mainly detect if there's any major slips.
Yeah. Well, those you can certainly, I think, if it's an internal test, you are with that company, so you know your architecture. You can talk to your business people, and you can all collectively decide on targets. But I imagine that for your users, it's difficult to tell them whether their tests have passed or failed, because it's so dependent. There's so many variables that GitLab wouldn't know.
Yeah, we can do at GitLab, because GitLab being a development tool, obviously our main target user set want a speedy application, and will be more vocal if it's not. So we've set an ambitious target that we're working towards to try just get GitLab to be as lean as it can, to get out of the way essentially and let people get on with developing their code. But when we develop the feature in GitLab, that's why quite a few times that I've said, it's up to user. We've left it open because there's so many different ways that performance can be tackled by people with their software, and whatever targets they want, it completely depends on their own specific what they're looking to do with the software, who the target users are and stuff. As you say, some software doesn't need to have a super quick response time, where others do. So it completely depends. Yeah, so that's why we leave it open to the users to make their own decisions.
Another awesome thing about having load tests in a CI/CD pipeline is that you get a lot of data points. And so what I've done in previous engagements is, if I have, especially if you're targeting production, not necessarily with a full-blown load test, but with any sort of performance test, if you have those data points, then you can take them and graph them on the same chart as conversions. So if you're an e-commerce site, then you can get out that you can pull out from your Google Analytics or something how many people actually checked out. And then if you graph them together by time, then you can actually see how performance affects conversions. And that might help a company sort of narrow it down and see, okay, well, this is clearly unacceptable for us because conversions went down significantly. And you can sort of see how responsive or how sensitive your users are to performance. And sometimes it might be that they're not sensitive at all. If it's like a good example here is if it's like a student portal to a university, there is no competition. Students might not like it, but they're still going to use that portal because they don't have a choice. So they might not be as sensitive to response times.
Yeah,
That's the sort of thing you can only do though if you have the data points.
Yeah, that's the golden data I was talking about earlier. Having that comparison piece is just widely important. We do have a separate another test where we run our test tool against the last 5 versions of GitLab every month, and then we can actually compare them like for like to see if there's any major slips that we've missed in our testing as an additional layer. So it is very once you get into that, once you've got everything else worked out, you can get into that space. The data can be immensely valuable.
So we've got a few more minutes, and up until this point, it's been all very nice things to say about K6. What were issues that you experienced with K6 in scripting, or features that you wish K6 had?
Yeah, I think me and Mihail's already talked about this in our last chat, but yeah, I mean the things that we had to immediately tackle was that we definitely had to run more than one test. That's definitely the key thing. I think K6 would massively benefit from them, where you can actually just pass in multiple tests and tell it to run it and have a nice summary output at the end. That's what our wrapper does, and we look forward to when K6 can do it itself, because that would just unlock, because that also impacts the feature in GitLab, because right now it can only run it's just pure native K6 really. So it can run one test and it can do whatever that test, what you can do in K6 today, whether it's with scenarios or stuff like that. And that's an amazing start. But then the next step would be I want to actually run all these different tests on different aspects of the application or the website. And that's definitely the big feature we're looking forward to. But I appreciate that that's not easy. So we're okay. We're not blocked by that. So we're just waiting for you guys to get on with that.
Waiting for Mihail. He's not the only one on the K6 OSS team, but he's the one that's here. So
yeah,
we're not working on it.
I guess also because there's a workaround, right? You can do it with scenarios. It's just it'll be a bear of a big script.
It'd be massive, yeah. So
yeah.
So
and I understand that.
In a lot of the cases, you can write like a small shell script to basically do run the tests and then do some processing if that's required. Like the problem here is that you want the processing as well to be done on all the tests, which is the actual problem, I guess, in this particular.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess that's the ask. Yeah, but I appreciate it's not easy, so that's fair enough. But yeah, that's the ask there. And then I think the other aspects that we've had to work on a little bit, and there's been features in K6 that can help us with it, but we dabbled a little bit with more scenario tests where a user is doing multiple actions in one test script, but then the summary output would be an average of all those actions. So then you see a high result, but you actually miss the fact that actually all the actions except one were good, but that one was actually really bad, and that's actually that impacted the full results at the end. We've worked around that by doing tagging in the results, so we can when we see it happening, we can go into the actual test and look at the individual endpoints and how they've performed, and that helps us. But any improvements in that space would be welcomed as well, I guess. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think multiple people have like said that like they expected that the summary will be per scenario, which we haven't done. Like I don't think that like the whole scenario implementation, which is infamous with its pull request number of 1007, was like a thing that we finally pushed through. Basically, like we got some stuff that like we didn't want to. I think that we didn't get enough stuff out of it, but like that's a different matter. And like, and unfortunately, like I don't think that we have even discussed multiple like having summary per scenario. It will probably be pretty big in like the if you have like 10 scenarios, you have like the summary that's probably going to be quite big. And I'm not really certain if like even people do 10 scenarios currently and so on. So like I have seen scripts with like 50 scenarios in them, and like I have tested scripts like 1,000 scenarios in them, but like that's not
Oh
like
wow.
really but yeah, scenarios technically do tag their metrics. Like all metrics emitted by the scenario are actually tagged with the scenario name. So like you can technically, like the same way that you probably currently do it, like the specific endpoints, just look at the tag with the scenario, which is like another workaround. But yeah, I guess this is a thing that, yeah, it's kind of on the roadmap. Like we're currently working on redoing our metric system, which will hopefully give us a way to like do this without actually being very unperformant. So yeah.
And per transaction too, Mihail. I want that too. Like not just on a scenario level, but like
when we fix the metric system, like
but
when we get
like
it more performant, we'll get it. Yeah.
because I think that seeing an average response time for everything when one's a post and one's a get, it's like I don't even look at that because they're so different. So that's actually one of the reasons
My
that I use
general like
K6 Cloud.
my general point on the summary is that like it's not supposed to be looked at by anyone that actually wants to like see how their performance actually is. If they have more than one endpoint, they probably should have an output and like do it there or
Yeah.
something like this. Like for small tests, I guess it's fine. Like if you have like I'm going to do 20 requests to this, and like I guess like 20 requests are not going to be that much. So I'm basically like measuring how this system handles just 20 like a request, how what its response time is. I just do 20, so I have an average of something, and so on and so forth. And I have to do like 1,000 of those because like I have 1,000 endpoints. That's probably a good reason to like not have an endpoint to like actually like graph you the different response times. But in general, we have seen users where like like you have like some amount of response times for some time, and then like suddenly it basically gets a lot worse or a lot better because like your system scaled or like or some resource actually like you for example have memory or something like this. So things like this are really hard to show in the summary. Like we will basically have to like be our own output, which makes K6 like a tool that's not only like a load performance tool, but now it's also like a metric storage at some point. And like then we have to do a graph in the summary, given like some issues we have with different command lines and shells and so on and so forth. That's also is probably going to be a very fun task to tackle and fix for everybody. So yeah, like it's just like it starts to get harder and harder the more you get into it, because like if you do it just for yourself, you can do whatever you need to. Like you can just do like I care about these 3 endpoints instead of the thousand of I have. Like I have thousands that like I do, but like I only care about 3. But like to do it like for the whole test, we'll basically have to do it for every endpoint. So yeah, I guess there are solutions. We just haven't gotten to them yet.
So next time that we have you on, Mihail, you'll have addressed Grant's wish list. No, I won't say that because he just won't go on.
I'm not coming.
Yeah. Grant, was there anything else? I'm mindful of the time, but was there anything that you wanted to plug, either personally or for GitLab, or anything that you want to say before we close up?
Nothing major. No, we're just working away diligently trying to improve the performance of GitLab. So if anyone's watching and thought that GitLab was unperformant, please take another look. We hope that hopefully you'll be impressed, and we're continuing. It's a first class feature now in GitLab. Essentially, we're working very hard trying to improve the performance, and we hope people get to see the effects. Thanks to K6.
Yeah. It's always nice to see a company that eats their own dog food. It leads to nice gains, like performance gains, like the ones that you've shown here. But thank you for coming on to office hours, and thanks for using K6 too. that's really cool. It was awesome to find out that a big name like GitLab used us as well.
No, it's well deserved. Yeah, we've been very happy with the tool overall. So
okay, well, before Mihail's head grows any bigger, we'll end it there.
Fair enough.
All right, thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye.